Good evening. Good to see you tonight in the house of the Lord. If you will, please, let's get a hymn book. Turn to page 561. I love to tell the story. First, second, and last verse, please. 561. I love to tell the story of unseen things above, of Jesus and His glory, of Jesus and His love. I love to tell the story because I know 'tis true. It satisfies my longing as nothing else can do. I love to tell the story, will be my theme in glory, to tell the old story of Jesus and His love. I love to tell the story, for wonderful it seems that all the golden fancies of all our golden dreams. I love to tell the story, it did so much for me, and that is just the reason I tell it now to thee. I love to tell the story, will be my theme in glory, to tell the old story of Jesus and His love. I love to tell the story for those who know it best, seem hungering and thirsty to hear it like the rest. And when in scenes of glory I sing the new song, will be the old story that I have loved so long. I love to tell the story, will be my theme in glory, to tell the old story of Jesus and His love. All right, let's sing one more this evening, page 565, just 4 pages to the right. Send the light, and that's a good message to have this evening. First, second, and last verse, please. Send the light. There's a call comes ringing o'er the restless way. Send the light, send the light. There are souls to rescue, there are souls to save. Send the light, send the light, send the light. The blessed gospel light, let it shine from shore to shore. Send the light, the blessed gospel light, let it shine forevermore. We have heard the Macedonian call today. Send the light, send the light, and the golden offering at the cross we lay. Send the light, send the light, send the light, the blessed gospel light, let it shine from shore to shore. Send the light, the blessed gospel light, let it shine forevermore. Let us not grow grow weary in the work of love. Send the light, send the light. Let us gather jewels for a crown above. Send the light, send the light, send the light, the blessed gospel light. Let it shine from shore to shore. Send the light, the blessed gospel light. Let it shine forevermore. Thank you. You may be seated.
All right. Couple of songs about getting the mission done tonight to get things started, and in just a moment we're going to have our mission update. We'll have a little bit of a different order to service tonight. I want to have Brother Corey come and give a mission update, and then we're going to go right into Bible study, and then we're going to have all of our prayer time together there at the end. So we're looking forward to that time. I hope that you do. I hope that you look forward to the opportunity to minister in corporate prayer, but we're also going to be praying over things that God speaks to our heart about in the study tonight. But I want to welcome you. I will say it's good to see all of you tonight. And we're thankful to be back in this place, and good to see some folks in here on a Wednesday night that maybe some of you is still getting to be some of those first times getting back to some of the services. Many to pray for tonight, I'm sure, and I just want to remind you, if you've got a special prayer request you want mentioned, fill out a blue card. We'll make time to collect those before we give out the prayer request here in just a little while. Because that's important, and because this service right here tonight is where we can all join in praying for that special request at the same time, and that'll be a great thing to do. So I'm going to ask Brother Corey to come on now and give us the mission update for this week.
All right, our missionaries of the week are the Brown family, Brother Dallas and Miss Ashley, and their children Parker and Eden Brown, our missionaries in Burkina Faso, West Africa. In October letter, they write, "Thank you so much to all those who prayed for our evangelism campaign last month. We started our campaign on Wednesday night and held services every night, finishing on Saturday night. Each night we spent a few hours canvassing the community, inviting people to come. Then we had a gospel film and a message. The first night only a few people attended, but on Friday night we had our largest crowd of over 100 people. We preached the gospel and are praying that people will come to our church. The kids ministry of the church has really taken off. Last month we held a one-day back-to-school bash and tried to get as many kids from the surrounding area as possible to come. And we had around 140 kids show up to participate. We are working on reaching these kids with the gospel. We started the weekly kids club meeting where we sing, teach a lesson, and play a few games. Please pray for these kids and for our new kids ministry. Your missionaries in Burkina Faso, Brother Dallas and Miss Ashley, Parker, and Eden Brown."
We told you this a few times before. We wanted to go to the mission field and help the Browns over there in Burkina Faso. When we first brought that up, there were several people like, "Oh yeah, let's go. West Africa, right? Let's go." And then we said, now, Brother Brown said to let everybody know that we'll be sleeping outside and your bathroom will be a hole in the ground. And all of a sudden, it was, "Oh, what were you saying?" No. But you never can tell. But I like to get the reports from them, what they're doing over there in Burkina Faso, and every mission field's unique, and it all has its own needs and design. But so often it reads like what you think of when you think of like an old missions from years ago, going to a foreign field and planting churches in villages and just reaching people with the gospel. And so I appreciate very much their ministry they're doing. I want to ask you tonight to look in Philippians again, Philippians Chapter 2. And we're going to continue with looking into this letter that Paul wrote. I didn't choose to do this on purpose or anything. I know it's where our Sunday school classes are studying right now, and I'm going to just confess to you, I'm not reading the Sunday school book. I haven't read one page of Always Rejoicing. I trust Paul Chappell. That's good enough for me. But I also don't want to be influenced. I don't want any kind of, I just want to be right where the Lord wants me to be. But excited that Sunday school classes are using that. The youth on their Monday night during prayer meeting on Monday nights. I think it's every other week they meet and have a Bible study here on Monday nights during that time. They're studying the book of Philippians right now. And I'm not able to stand here and tell you that we're going to study Philippians out through the next several weeks or whatever. But if you remember 2 weeks ago, we looked at Philippians Chapter 1. We were down in the Family Life Center. And I spoke to you about us being in a season of renewal. And the main, really just a main thought out of Chapter 1 was the idea of hope, of living in hope, confident expectation. Well, as I come to Chapter 2, I see another part of season of renewal and something that captures my attention. But before I go any further, I want to begin tonight with a question for reflection. Now, I'm actually going to ask you this question and give you a moment to think about it. But then also, it's one that you can come back to in a little while during our prayer time. But here's my question for you tonight, what I believe that I felt led to ask as we started out this evening's study. I want to ask you this: what have you found yourself praying for lately? What have you found yourself praying for lately? And what I mean by that, what is that thing that you're seeking after? Now, if you've got something, it's already come to mind probably. Because it's going to be something that on a regular basis you're realizing, I really have to have this, or I really need this. This is very important in my life right now. So I want you to think about that just a moment. What is the thing you're seeking after, the thing you've recognized as needing this from God in my life right now? And I want you to take a moment, and if you're writing anything down, you got a place you're writing stuff down, I want you to write that answer down here while we wait for just a moment. What have you found yourself praying for lately? Now, don't make up anything. That won't do anything. That won't do any good. And if nothing's coming to mind, then I would encourage you to give some serious consideration to, what should I be asking for right now? What is it that I'm missing or needing in my life right now that would fill up some empty places, bridge some gaps in my life, my relationships, my spiritual development? So for me, the answer is easy. And I've shared this the last few days with different ones, but going all the way back to the first part of this month, I have found myself praying for the very subject that we find here in Philippians Chapter 2, which I was really excited to be brought back to it the end of last week, realizing that we would study here tonight. But I'm going to answer that in just a moment. But look with me at chapter 2, verse 1. Let's read these first 8 verses. Paul says, "If there be therefore any consolation in Christ, if any comfort of love, if any fellowship of the Spirit, if any bowels and mercies, fulfill ye my joy, that ye be like-minded, having the same love, being of one accord, of one mind. Let nothing be done through strife or vainglory, but in lowliness of mind let each esteem other better than themselves. Look not every man on his own things, but every man also on the things of others. Let this mind be in you, which was also in Christ Jesus, who being in the form of God thought it not robbery to be equal with God, but made himself of no reputation, and took upon him the form of a servant, and was made in the likeness of men. And being found in fashion as a man, he humbled himself. It's an important choice of words. And became obedient unto death, even the death of the cross." Now, what I've been praying for a lot lately is what you find in verse number 5. Let this mind be in you, which was also in Christ Jesus. I have found myself for the last 3 or 4 weeks or whatever it's been now, praying a lot. Lord, I have got to have the mind of Christ. Jesus, I need your mind. Help me to help me to see like you see and think like you think and understand like you understand. And I've become two things. I've become so aware of my need for that, and at the same time I'm becoming so much more aware of how I come short in that. But those two things will often work together. Realizing that we have that lack or that need and knowing how valuable it is will compel us to seek it. And that's a good thing. I wrote this down the other day. Lord, this is at the top of my wish list. I need your mind. I need your mind, Jesus. I want to know, how can I really have the mind of Christ, because I really need it. There's so much to be done. Any given day, any given week, there's so much to be done. There are so many people who will need me to be at my best. But I can tell you, my best is not good enough. I find myself too impatient. I find myself often too emotional sometimes, too logical at other times. When I should move from the stirring of my soul, I want to analyze everything. And then I want to, do the opposite. It's confusing. Something that I prayed recently was this, and I wrote this down and came back to it. I said, Lord, give me your mind. I want to see and think and assess like you do. I want to lead well. I want to not live frustrated and disappointed in others. And really, I don't want to live frustrated and disappointed with myself. So that's been my prayer. I've been looking for this. And here in Philippians Chapter 2, this is what Paul is talking about in the whole first half of the whole, probably 2/3 of the chapter is centered around verse number 5. I would even say verse 5 and 6, which I'll explain in a moment. The word for mind here is it means more than just the components of the mind. Now, for those of you that have been with us and you've been studying with us, I could drop a quiz question right now. Pop quiz. The mind consists of 3 components. What are they? Give me one. I can't hear the whispers. Say it out loud like you mean it. Thoughts. What else? Emotions. And I'm hearing stuff, but I can't distinguish the sound. There's no wrong answer unless you don't say the right thing. All right. I'm going to have to give you a 66 on this quiz, class. Thoughts, emotions or feelings, and desires. These 3 things make up the mind, the soul, the who you are, the deepest, truest you. And this word, though, that Paul uses here is not just the word that speaks of those components, thoughts, feelings, desires, but it's actually the word which means to exercise all of those things, thoughts, feelings, and desires, in a certain way. It's to have a certain direction. A good way to use a modern word would be to have a certain mindset. We know what that phrase means, or that idea. To have a certain disposition or a certain attitude towards life. To have a posture towards life. To have a worldview like Jesus had. To have a view of culture and people and current events and immediate conflicts the same way that Jesus viewed them. This is hard. This is really challenging and convicting. Because again, I'm seeing this growing awareness of how much I need this, but also this awareness of how much I come short of it. So it's a tall order. I really want to think and speak the way Jesus does and how He would in every situation. I really want to, but I find myself being a lot more Peter than Jesus. And I know I say that a lot, and thank the Lord for Peter and all that we have about him, because he's kind of like David he's kind of like the David of the New Testament, like David was in the Old Testament. We get such a good look into him. And I know in reality we get a deeper look into the Apostle Paul because he wrote so much. But I mean, just looking at Peter from the eyes of those around him with the gospel accounts really gives us something to hope in, because we can look at him and say, well, the Lord didn't give up on him and he turned out well. There's hope for me. But I say that I feel more like Peter because this word that Paul uses here, let this mind be in you, is the same word that Jesus used when he rebukes Peter in Mark 8 and verse 33 when he said, "Get thee behind me, Satan, for thou savorest not the things which be of God." He savors not. He doesn't have the right mind toward what he's after, what he's doing. He's not after the things of God. His mind is toward the things of the world, toward the things of himself. And so a good way to talk about the mind tonight would be, what are you savoring? You know, what are you savoring? So if we start, though, with this idea right here about the mind of Christ, if we start by asking, what is the mind of Christ? Because his worldview, his posture, his mindset. Before I dive into any verses in chapter 2, as I was reflecting on this a couple of weeks ago, I wrote down just 3 things about the mind of Christ that help put a framework to it for me, and I think will help you. I wrote this down first. The mind of Christ is always toward the spiritual life first. Always. Now, Jesus was not the word's not coming to my mind, an ascetic. Am I saying that right? It's a hard word to say. We don't use it a lot. But Jesus wasn't one who believed in punishing the body and, inflicting self-harm to prove that he was spiritual. He wasn't that kind of a person. He took care of himself. But what I'm saying is everything Jesus did, every engagement of his life, every activity of his day was rooted, first of all, in the spiritual realm. Everything fits into the framework of the spiritual realm, the kingdom of God and the realm of the soul. Jesus lived from within outwardly. Now, we don't do so well with that all the time. We are, in fact, in this day and time, more so probably than ever, more affected from the outward in. That's not the deep life. I've been listening to a few interviews, so these numbers or thoughts are in my head, but it's been said that if you look at the speed of life back in the Bible times, do you know how fast-paced life was in that day? Roughly about 3 miles per hour. Why? Everybody walked. There was no super hurry. And I was reminded, listening to this interview again, of this thought, and those of you that have read the Get Your Life Back book, this is mentioned in there, but of how we sometimes read in the gospel that Jesus and the disciples left Judea and went to, Capernaum or whatever, and we think, well, wow, we think of hopping in the car and 15 minutes we're over there and we're on to the next thing, but this would be like a 2-3 day journey for them, where they're walking, and nothing is recorded in the Bible of what happened. See, the pace of life was very different. But today, we're so greatly affected by the outward in. Let me give you another example. And I told you this not long ago. I read a report that said, pre-pandemic now, that the 18 to 25-year-old demographic, their average screen time is around 11 hours a day. And what are they getting from all of that? We're getting constantly bombarded with everything. I heard this in this interview, and I listened to this gentleman interviewed 3 different times by 3 different people, and this came up in every one of them. He mentioned a anthropologist, I don't remember the guy's name, that did a study of the human brain and the capacity of our brain, and studied it alongside of culture and society through the years. And his conclusion was that your brain has the capacity, your soul has the capacity to live in and among a community of about 100 people. Now, I want to let that just sink down on you for just a moment. About the size of a good-sized church. About the size of a neighborhood street. About the size of a village in some places. 100 people? Now, if you just walk back through your day, and if you could analyze how many people you talked to through your phone or texted through your phone, how much news you consumed, and how many people are impacted by that news of this disaster, this disease, this crime. Your soul, and by the way, you weren't just getting it from Greensboro or Burlington. You were getting it from literally around the world. You're hearing what everybody's doing and what everybody's got going on. And all those problems are being piped into us at rates of up to 11 hours a day. So we're so much more living outwardly affecting our inner being than what Jesus lived, which was to live from the inner man outwardly. And I got to tell you, I so much want to live like Jesus did. And I see things all the time that I'm messing up on. I'm thinking again about, these phones have taken over our lives. Some of you sitting here, I'm going to pick on you. Some of you that aren't as young as you used to be, when these phones became a thing, you said, I don't need one of them. Look at you now. Have they not invaded our lives? Now, it's like a lot of other stuff. It just is the life we're living now. I don't think that there's any way or need to get a big trash bag in here and let's all chunk our phones and walk away. Let's have a big bonfire and burn our phones, I don't think that's the answer. But somehow we've got to get so much in tune with the life of Jesus and the mind of Jesus that we don't allow these things to consume and control our life, but that we are making use of things to live that spiritual, soulful life. Well, enough about that. Except maybe to ask the question, how do you enter into and engage with your day? Is everything spiritual, everything connected to the kingdom, everything connected to your soul, or is it more like there's the spiritual things, meaning like prayer time and church and listening to gospel music as I'm driving, listening to preaching on the radio? There's the spiritual things, and then there's the real world stuff. I got a job, the lawnmower's broke again, I got potholes in my driveway, my spouse is upset, I got unpaid bills, the real world stuff. I feel like it's safe to say that the vast majority of people, even Christians, they more have it categorized. There's the spiritual soul things, and then there's the rest of the real world stuff. Jesus lived as if everything was part of the kingdom and lived from the inward out. Let me just read this verse to you. Romans 8, 5 and 6. For they that are after the flesh do mind the things of the flesh, but they that are after the Spirit, the things of the Spirit. For to be carnally minded is death, but to be spiritually minded is life and peace. That verse just explodes inside of me when I read it out loud. Because there's so much that I understand and comprehend that there's this carnal world we're living in only produces death. Much of the struggle we have in our relationships is because we got too much carnality. But to be spiritually minded is life and peace. That's the stuff we're looking for. Thomas Merton said this, and I think it's an overlooked truth. that every moment and every event of every man or woman's life on earth plants something in their soul, which serves to remind me that everything matters. Everything matters. Everything. Who you spoke with today matters. Who you listened to matters. What you wore matters. What you ate matters. When you go to bed matters, and when you rise up matters. All the things that Psalm 139 says that God is paying attention to, they've got to matter. But we don't always live like that. Having the mind of Christ means that I'm always living toward the spiritual mindset first. See everything framed in that. Let me give you the next thing. The mind of Christ was always surrendered to the Father's will. Always surrendered to the Father's will. He was given over to what the Father wanted, His Father. That's what mattered to Him. That's what He lived for. That's what moved Him and drove Him. He was very surrendered to this singular focus on His life's purpose and mission. Singularity of mind. We've talked about that a lot in the last year. This singularity of mind. I keep coming back to this thing of decluttering life. In so many ways we're called to do that. And I'm learning to relish small victories. Let me explain. Now, Athena won't like all this that I share. I got rid of some ties today. I just pulled my drawer out and said, you know what, I'm tired of all this jumbled up mess in here. I'm just going to get rid of some stuff. Now, she tells me I don't have enough ties, or I wear the same ones, or, well, actually what she tells me is that I don't match usually. If she ain't around for me to ask for help, I just throw on whatever I got. This is a small victory. I took probably 15 minutes, maybe less, and went through my drawers again today, and I got rid of a pile of stuff about like that. A couple of T-shirts that I haven't worn in years. They're in the bottom. I mean, it felt good. Less stuff. I got less stuff to worry about. I was thinking when in a house like ours with as many drivers as we've got, it looks like a used car lot. And I was thinking, boy, it's going to be wonderful one day. I'm going to sell off about 4 of these vehicles around here. Just keep 1, maybe 2. But all that's a little bit getting off track, but bringing back to the point of that singularity of mind. To live like you know who you are and whose you are. That's how Jesus lived. Now, this is a very big truth, and we're going to come back to this next week. This is big, and I want you to really take note of what I'm about to say. It is impossible to estimate the value of being secure in your identity. I'm going to say that one more time because I believe with all my heart that this point, this truth right here is a key to unraveling a lot of pain in your life right now. A lot of problems in your life right now. You cannot overestimate the value of being secure in your identity. Of knowing who you are and whose you are. Of having real validation from the God of glory who says to you, your life matters. And when I gave you life, I had a purpose in mind for you. And to live without that validation, to live without that affirmation, is to live a little empty, a little scared, maybe a little angry. But see, Jesus had that. Jesus knew who He was, and He knew what His Father believed about Him. I want to take you back to the baptism. Oh, I think we miss this. You say, well, why did Jesus have to be baptized? I mean, even John said, you should be baptizing me. Why are you coming to me to be baptized? We forget something very important about that day. When Jesus was baptized, as soon as He came up out of the water, what happened? The heavens opened. The Spirit descended like a dove upon Him. And the Father spoke. and said, "This is my beloved Son in whom I am well pleased." That day, Jesus of Nazareth got His blessing from the Father. Now, He knew what He was going to do. He knew that He had a mission, but He heard that validation on His life. To know what the Father thinks about you is extremely important. And maybe this is a question for reflection in just a moment, but do you know what He thinks about you? Now, the Bible is helpful in this. The Bible has many passages that tell us what our Father thinks about us. But sometimes we can know those verses and they not be really personal to us. But I promise you that if you will take the time to sincerely ask Him what He thinks of you, He will tell you. And it may surprise you. But you need that. A lot of times we just feel one or two, I got to wrap this up, but one or two things is happening in most people's lives because they don't have this. They're either very passive, kind of just, woe is me, I'm just kind of making it through, I don't deserve anything, I'm not anything. And there's a little hyperbole in that maybe, but a lot of people live that way, and a lot of people don't try not to let it on, but they really feel that way deep down. And then there's the other extreme of the over-the-top guy and gal. The ones that are just, why, and want everybody to think so well of them. Look at me, look at, I stand back, I'm here. Both of those people are revealing something about their soul. They are deeply insecure. Anybody ever had a boss man or a boss lady that was just overbearing? Just everybody's going to know when they're there, and they're going to be the biggest presence in the room, and it's going to be done their way. And you know what I'm talking about. Some of the most insecure people in the world. Jesus was surrendered to the Father's will because He knew who He was and whose He was. And we can't live that way if we don't know. We'll always be second guessing. We'll always be wondering. We'll always be feeling like we're just coming up short. I'm just going to tell you this last thing, and I'm going to go to prayer. I wrote down these three things, just kind of introductory thoughts about the mind of Christ. The mind of Christ is always toward the spiritual life first. The mind of Christ was always surrendered to the Father's will. But thirdly, the mind of Christ was always sacrificial towards others. Always sacrificial towards others. Now by that I want to be clear, I don't mean that he was just rolling over and being used and abused by everybody. He was not, as they say, just being walked over like a doormat. In fact, you have to understand that, because I know what will pop in our mind, like, well, look at the way they treated him. Absolutely. But there's a difference. You see, he willingly endured the accusations. He willingly knelt and washed the disciples' feet. He willingly laid down his life on the cross. That's the difference. He wasn't forced, he was surrendered. And so sacrifice was a way of life. He lived to offer himself to all who needed him, and there was always the sense of this eternal framework guiding him. Have I said enough already that we can all agree this sounds so impossible to get right? I look at all three of those things that I wrote down and that I've given you. I look at all three of them and I say, nope, nope, nope. I'm not getting this. I'm not doing it. I'm failing in these things. But let me leave you with a word of encouragement. You're doing better than you think you are. You're doing far better than you think you are. You know why? Because you're His. And that matters greatly. So, as we go into our prayer time, and I'm going to receive any prayer requests that you might have wanted to give, but I want you to think about these questions. What have you been praying about lately? What's really been on your heart that you've been asking, realizing your need for? Do you know what the Father thinks about you? Oh, every father in this room, we would all have to kind of hang our head a little and raise our hand and say, yeah, I failed. I failed to speak that into my children the way I should have. But I promise you, our Father in heaven never fails. Usually, if we don't know, it's because we've not been listening. But if you'll ask Him, He'll tell you what He thinks of you. And by the way, don't limit Him in how He speaks to you. Don't wait to read that certain verse. Don't wait until the next Sunday sermon. Go into it eyes wide open, ears wide open, heart wide open. You'll be amazed how He speaks to you. He thinks a lot of you. And if you've got questions on your heart tonight, I want to encourage you to take a few moments as we go to prayer time and just ask Him.